What do you do when the man you promised your life to, the father of your unborn child, doesn't just betray you, but tries to erase you? This isn't a story about simple heartbreak. It's about a calculated act of war, disguised as an affair. It's about a key that no longer fits the lock of your own home, a stranger's perfume wafting from your marital bed, and the devastating realization that the man you love has become a monster. But he made one fatal mistake. He forgot who held the power. He changed the locks, but he couldn't change the name on the deed. The first sign of trouble wasn't a lipstick-stained collar or a suspicious late night at the office. It was silence. A profound, hollow silence that had crept into the cavernous spaces of Blackwood Manor, the historic mansion Adeline had inherited from her grandmother. The silence was a stark contrast to the life teeming inside her. At 7 months pregnant, Adeline felt like a walking, breathing vessel of the future, a future she was supposed to share with her husband, Preston. Preston Davenport was by all accounts a man who had everything. With a jawline as sharp as his business acumen, he had built a tech empire from the ground up. He was the charismatic force, the deal-maker, the man who could command a boardroom with a single steady gaze. Adeline, with her quiet grace and art history, background, was his perfect counterpart. She softened his edges. He gave her a world of glittering security. Their life at Blackwood Manor, a sprawling stone estate on the outskirts of Greenwich, Connecticut, was supposed to be their fortress, the foundation upon which they would build their family. Adeline had poured her soul into the mansion. It was her ancestral home, a place of cherished childhood memories, and she had lovingly overseen its restoration. Every polished mahogany banister, every pane of restored stained glass, every curated piece of art was a testament to her love for the home and the life she was building within its walls. The deed, a thick vellum document stored safely in a family vault, was unequivocally in her name, Adeline Rousseau Davenport, a formality Preston had called it when they married. "What's yours is mine, and what's mine is yours," he'd said with a dazzling smile. Adeline had believed him. The silence began with a critical business trip to Singapore. It was sudden, leaving Adeline to manage the final preparations for the nursery alone. His texts became sporadic, his calls brief and sterile. "Things are intense here, Addie. You know how it is." She did know, or she thought she did. She busied herself arranging tiny clothes in the dresser, testing the rocking chair, her hand resting constantly on the curve of her belly, where their son kicked a tiny, reassuring rhythm against the backdrop of her growing unease. The day it all shattered was a Tuesday. Adeline had a routine prenatal appointment. The doctor assured her everything was perfect. The baby was strong, healthy. Buoyed by the good news, she decided to surprise Preston. He was due back that afternoon, and she imagined his relief at seeing her, his hands on her stomach, feeling their son's movements. She stopped at their favorite bakery and picked up a box of his preferred macarons, their little tradition. As she turned her Land Rover onto the long gravel driveway of Blackwood Manor, something felt off. The grand iron gates, which usually stood open during the day, were shut tight. Frowning, she used the remote clipped to her sun visor. Nothing. She clicked it again. The gates remained stubbornly closed. A flicker of irritation gave way to a cold knot of dread in her stomach. She got out the gravel crunching under her flats and keyed the code into the panel. Access denied. Her heart began to pound a frantic, heavy beat against her ribs. This was impossible. It was her code. She tried again. Access denied. Panic, sharp and icy, began to prickle at the edges of her consciousness. She called Preston. It went straight to voicemail. She called his assistant, who sounded flustered. He landed this morning, Mrs. Davenport. He said he was heading straight home. Forced to park on the road, Adeline used the small pedestrian gate, which thankfully opened with her old-fashioned brass key. The walk up the driveway felt a mile long. The familiar grey stone of the mansion seemed foreign foreboding. The manicured lawns, the blooming rose bushes. It was all hers, yet she felt like a trespasser. She reached the massive oak front door. Her hands trembled as she inserted her key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. She jiggled it, pushed it in further. It was useless. It was as if the lock's internal mechanism had been completely changed. This wasn't a malfunction. This was deliberate. Her mind raced, searching for a rational explanation. A security upgrade he forgot to tell her about. A misunderstanding. But the cold, calculated nature of it. The main gate, the front door, screamed of something else. Something malicious. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she walked around to the French doors of the sunroom, her hand sliding along the cold stone of her own home. They were locked. Every window, every door. She was locked out. The box of macarons slipped from her numb fingers, scattering the brightly colored pastries across the stone patio. Desperate, she hammered her fist on the solid oak of the front door. "Preston, Preston, it's me. Let me in." The silence stretched. Then she heard the telltale click of the deadbolt being drawn back. The door opened not wide, but just enough for a sliver of light to cut across the porch, and in that sliver stood Preston. He didn't look like a man who had just returned from a grueling business trip. He was fresh, wearing a silk robe she'd never seen before, and his expression was one of cold, detached annoyance. He didn't look at her belly. He didn't look at her eyes. He looked somewhere over her shoulder, as if she were a delivery person he was about to dismiss. "Adeline," he said, his voice flat. "What are you doing? What am I doing?" Her voice was a strangled whisper. "I live here. The key. The gate. I couldn't get in." A woman's voice, husky and unfamiliar, drifted from inside. "Press. Honey. Who is it?" "Is it?" Adeline's blood ran cold. The world tilted on its axis. From behind Preston, a woman appeared. She was younger, with sharp, fox-like features and a cascade of fiery red hair. She was also wearing a silk robe, a matching one. She leaned against Preston, her hand possessively on his chest, and looked Adeline up and down with an expression of mild amusement, her gaze lingering for a moment on Adeline's swollen abdomen before dismissing it entirely. "Oh," the woman said, a smirk playing on her lips. "It's her." The casual cruelty of the word "her" struck Adeline with the force of a physical blow. She was no longer Adeline. She was her. The obstacle, the before. "Preston." "What is this?" Adeline finally managed the words tearing from her throat. "Who is this?" Preston's face hardened. The mask of civility dropped completely, revealing a chilling emptiness beneath. "This is Sabrina," he said, as if introducing a new business associate. "She's living here with me now. We'd appreciate it if you didn't make a scene." Adeline stared, uncomprehending. The air, the trees, the solid ground beneath her feet. It all felt unreal. "Living here, Preston. This is my home. I'm your wife. I'm carrying your child." He sighed a long, exasperated sound. Don't be so dramatic, Adeline. Things have changed. I've moved on. I'll have my lawyer send your things to wherever you decide to go. I'll make sure you're taken care of course. A modest settlement. Child support. I'm not a monster. I'm not a monster. The words echoed in the cavern of her shock. He stood there in the doorway of her family home, with his mistress wrapped around him, having changed the locks on his pregnant wife, and declared he was not a monster. Sabrina shifted her smirk, widening. "Look, this is really awkward," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Maybe you should just go." Adeline's gaze was fixed on Preston. She was searching for a flicker of the man she married, a hint of remorse, of love, of shared history. She found nothing. Only a cold, hard finality. He was a stranger. Worse, he was an enemy who knew all her weaknesses. "My things," Adeline whispered. "Preston, the things in this house, they're mine. This house is mine." He actually chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "Adeline, please. Let's not get into legal semantics. I'm the one who runs the world. Remember, I handle the finances, the assets. You handled the decorating. It's a beautiful house. I'll give you that, and I intend to enjoy it." He began to close the door. "Preston." "No," she cried, a raw, primal sound of pain and disbelief. "You can't do this." The last thing she saw before the heavy oak door clicked shut was his empty eyes and Sabrina's triumphant smile. The deadbolt slid home with a definitive metallic thud. Adeline stood alone on the porch of Blackwood Manor, the home of her ancestors, the home she was meant to raise her son in. The silence was back, but now it was filled with the deafening sound of her own world imploding. She was pregnant, homeless, and her husband had just tried to erase her from her own life. He thought he had won. He thought the locks he had changed were a symbol of his absolute power. He had forgotten one tiny, crucial detail. The house wasn't an asset to be managed. It was a legacy. And it was still in her name. The first hour after the door closed was a blur of pure, unadulterated shock. Adeline found herself back in her car, parked awkwardly on the shoulder of the road, the engine off. She didn't remember walking back down the driveway. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, but they felt like they belonged to someone else. Her breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. The baby kicked a sharp, insistent reminder of the life that was wholly dependent on her, and the dam of her composure broke. Sobs racked her body, violent and gut-wrenching, the kind that leave you hollowed out and aching. He was going to send her things, her grandmother's rocking chair in the nursery, her father's collection of first-edition novels in the library. The very bed she had slept in since she was a girl, now occupied by that woman. Sabrina. The name was like acid on her tongue. Her first instinct was to call her parents, who had retired to a quiet life in Nantucket. But what would she say? How could she form the words, "Preston, my brilliant, successful husband has thrown me out of my own house for another woman and changed the locks." The shame was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Then through the fog of grief another name surfaced. Genevieve. Her best friend from college. Genevieve Dubois was the antithesis of Adeline's quiet nature. A fiercely brilliant corporate lawyer in Manhattan. Jen was all sharp angles, sharper wit, and an unapologetic pragmatism that had saved Adeline from her own naivety more than once. Adeline fumbled for her phone, her fingers thick and clumsy. Genevieve answered on the second ring. Addie. What's up? I've got a deposition in 10, so make it quick. Jen Adeline choked out the name a lifeline. The frantic energy in Genevieve's voice vanished, replaced by an immediate, focused calm. Adeline, what's wrong? Where are you? Through her tears, Adeline told her everything. The locked gate, the new doorknob. Preston's cold eyes, the woman in the matching robe. She spared no detail, the words tumbling out in a torrent of pain and humiliation. Genevieve listened without interruption, a rare feat for her. When Adeline finally finished her voice, a raw whisper, the line was silent for a beat. Okay, Genevieve said, her voice now hard as steel. Listen to me very carefully. Do not go back to the house. Do not contact him. Do not text him. Do not call him. Do not send a single word. Are you hearing me? Yes, Adeline whispered. Where are you right now? In my car. Outside the gates. Okay. You're going to start the car and you're going to drive to my apartment in the city. I'll cancel my deposition. I'll meet you there. I have a key for you under the mat in the service entrance. Go to my place, lock the door, and wait for me. We have work to do. The drive to Manhattan was a 90-minute automaton's journey. Adeline followed the familiar route, her mind a maelstrom of Preston's words. I run the world. I handle the assets. He was so confident, so dismissive. He truly believed he owned everything, including her. He had always treated her inheritance as just another perk of their marriage, the beautiful backdrop for the life he was providing. The arrogance of it was staggering. By the time Genevieve burst into her sleek, minimalist apartment, Adeline was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the cityscape. Jen took one look at her friend's ashen face, and swollen eyes dropped her briefcase and wrapped her in a fierce hug. He's a dead man, Genevieve muttered into her hair. A walking, talking corpse who just doesn't know it yet. She pulled back and looked Adeline square in the eyes. Tears are done for now. We can cry later on a yacht in the Mediterranean after we've financially disemboweled him. Right now, we strategize. You told me the manor was your inheritance, correct? Left to you by your grandmother. Adeline nodded numbly. Yes. It was put in my name years before I even met Preston. Did you ever sign a post-nup? Or any document that would add his name to the deed or convert it to a marital asset? No, Adeline said, her voice a little stronger now. He mentioned it once, something about simplifying our estate. He called it asset consolidation, but we never got around to it. I still have the original deed in my family's safe deposit box. A slow, predatory smile spread across Genevieve's face. It was the same smile she wore in a courtroom, right before dismantling an opponent's witness. Oh, Preston, she said to the empty air. You magnificent idiot. She immediately got on the phone. We need someone who specializes in this. Someone with more teeth than a shark tank. Family law is too soft. We need a real estate litigator with a stone-cold heart. The man they found was Arthur Davies, a legendary lawyer in his late 60s who had handled the Rousseau family's affairs for decades. He was semi-retired, but the story of what happened to Adeline, his old client's granddaughter, brought him charging back into the fray. They met the next day in his mahogany-paneled office, a relic of old-world power and discretion. Mr. Davies, with his shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes, listened patiently as Adeline recounted the story for a second time. He reviewed a digital copy of the deed which Genevieve had procured from the bank. When Adeline finished, he steepled his fingers and looked at her over his spectacles. Adeline, the legal situation is unequivocally clear. Blackwood Manor, and everything within it that you can prove was yours prior to the marriage or purchased with your personal funds belongs to you, exclusively. He is in legal terms a guest, or as of Tuesday, a trespasser. The word trespasser sent a jolt of power through Adeline. "So I can just kick him out?" she asked. "It's not quite that simple," Mr. Davies cautioned. "Given that he is your spouse and has established residency, we can't just change the locks back. That could lead to a messy legal battle where he might claim rights as a tenant at will. We must proceed methodically. We will serve him with a formal notice to vacate. If he refuses, we begin eviction proceedings. It will be public, and it will be humiliating for him." Genevieve leaned forward. "But we shouldn't do that yet." "Not yet." Mr. Davies raised an eyebrow. "Explain, Ms. Dubois." "Preston is arrogant," Jen explained. "His hubris is his weakness. Right now, he thinks he has all the cards. He thinks Addie is a scared, emotional, pregnant woman who will roll over and accept his modest settlement. If we show our hand now, he'll lawyer up, try to hide assets and drag this out. We need to know why he's doing this. This isn't the behavior of a man having a simple midlife crisis affair. This is scorched earth. This is desperate." Mr. Davies nodded slowly, a look of respect in his eyes. "You're suggesting we gather intelligence before we strike?" "Exactly," Genevieve said. "We need to know what his financial situation really is. Is his company actually doing as well as he claims? What's this new woman's story? Is she a gold digger or something more? We need the full picture before we make our first move." And so the war room was established in Genevieve's apartment. Mr. Davies recommended a private investigator, a former NYPD detective named Frank Morrison, a gruff, no-nonsense man who looked like he'd stepped out of a classic noir film. "You want to know what your husband is really up to," Frank said in their first meeting, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Give me a week. People like him, men who think they're masters of the universe, they always leave a trail of breadcrumbs. They're too arrogant not to." While Frank began his deep dive into Preston's life, Adeline, under the guidance of Genevieve and Mr. Davies, began the silent, invisible work of protecting herself. She opened new bank accounts in her name only. She contacted her financial advisor and had a hold placed on all joint investment accounts, requiring dual signatures for any transaction. She compiled a meticulous list of every piece of art, furniture, and jewelry that was verifiably hers. Each action was a small reclamation of her power. The tears still came at night, a tidal wave of grief for the man she had loved and the future that had been stolen. But during the day, she was no longer a victim. She was a strategist, an architect of the battle to come. A week later, Frank Morrison returned. He sat across from the three of them in Genevieve's living room and laid a thin folder on the coffee table. "Well," he began, "your husband isn't just cheating on you, he's cheating the world." He opened the folder. "Davenport Tech is a house of cards. He won a massive government contract 2 years ago, but he underbid to get it. He's been bleeding cash ever since propping up the company's stock value with a series of increasingly risky and likely fraudulent financial maneuvers. He's leveraged everything. He's taken out secret loans. He's in debt up to his eyeballs to the tune of tens of millions of dollars." Adeline stared at the documents, her blood turning to ice. It all clicked into place. The desperation, the cruelty. The trip to Singapore wasn't for a business deal. Frank continued. It was a failed attempt to secure funding from a consortium of private equity vultures. They turned him down. He came back with nothing. He's about to lose everything. Genevieve let out a low whistle. So the house is his only major unencumbered asset, Frank confirmed. Except it's not his. He needs it. He either needs to sell it fast or use it as collateral for one last Hail Mary loan to save his skin. Adeline looked up, her eyes locking with Genevieve's. The raw pain was still there, but now it was forged with something new, a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just about a broken heart. This was about survival. Preston hadn't just thrown her out for another woman. He had planned to sacrifice her home, and her child's security on the altar of his own monumental failure. He had locked her out because he was getting ready to sell the ground from under her feet. And the woman, Adeline, asked her voice steady. Sabrina Frank slid another photo across the table. It was of Sabrina, but with a different man, a few years older, in front of a villa in Italy. Sabrina Vale. She has a type. Wealthy, powerful men on the verge of a spectacular collapse. She was with a hedge fund manager in London, right before he was indicted for fraud. Before that, a real estate tycoon in Miami, whose portfolio went belly up. She's not a mistress. She's a carrion bird. She helps them liquidate their lives, takes a massive cut, and flies away just before the whole thing implodes. Adeline looked at the picture of the smiling, predatory woman who was currently sleeping in her bed. She wasn't a pawn in Preston's game. She was his co-conspirator. Okay, Adeline said, her voice devoid of any tremor. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. When she turned back, her expression was one her grandmother would have recognized. It was the look of a Rousseau woman preparing for war. Mr. Davies, she said. Genevieve, we are not just getting the house back. We are going to dismantle him. The plan they devised was not one of brute force, but of surgical precision. It was a campaign of psychological warfare designed to unravel Preston and Sabrina from the inside out, making them feel the one thing they sought to inflict on Adeline, a complete loss of control. The eviction notice would be the final killing blow. But first they would lay siege to the fortress Preston thought was his. Adeline was the ghost in the machine, the rightful owner, whose presence would be felt everywhere, even though she was physically absent. The first move was silent and financial. Following Mr. Davies's instructions, Adeline executed the all orders to freeze their joint investment portfolio and the substantial joint savings account. It was a simple legal act for an account holder to demand a second signature for any withdrawals. Preston, accustomed to moving vast sums of money, with a click of his mouse would hit a digital brick wall. They didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, Adeline's phone buzzed with a number she now dreaded. It was Preston. She let it go to voicemail, her heart hammering against her ribs. He called again. And again. Finally, a text message appeared. Addie. What the hell is going on with the accounts? I can't move any money. Call me now. The raw panic in the text was a small, satisfying crack in his armor. He followed it with another. Is this some kind of game? Unlock the account. I have payroll to make. Genevieve, who was with Adeline, took the phone. We don't respond, she said, her voice firm. Let him sweat. Let him wonder what you know. The next phase of the assault was more direct. As the sole owner of Blackwood Manor, Adeline had every right to authorize services and inspections for her property. Her first call was to the most expensive and reputable landscaping company in Greenwich. Hello, she said, her voice professionally cheerful. I'm Adeline Davenport, owner of Blackwood Manor on Old Mill Road. I'd like to schedule a comprehensive tree and soil analysis for the entire property. Yes, the 20-acre lot. I'm concerned about Dutch elm disease and soil erosion. When can your team be there?" The following morning, a convoy of 5 trucks rolled up to the gates of Blackwood Manor. A team of 12 arborists and soil scientists, armed with clipboards and testing equipment, presented their work order signed and authorized by Adeline Rousseau Davenport to a bewildered Sabrina, who answered the door in her silk robe. She had no legal grounds to turn them away. For the entire day, Preston and Sabrina were prisoners in their stolen castle, their love nest turned into a work zone. Men were taking soil samples from the prized rose gardens. They were tagging ancient oak trees, their chainsaws buzzing ominously as they pruned dead branches. Adeline, from the quiet of Genevieve's apartment, could almost feel their mounting frustration. Preston's next text was furious. "What is this? Who are these people? Call them off." Adeline and Genevieve savored it before deleting it without a reply. 2 days later, it was the Pest Control Company. Adeline scheduled a mandatory and invasive termite and carpenter ant inspection, citing the age of the historic property. This time, the technicians had to enter the house, drilling small, discreet holes in the baseboards accessing the attic and shining flashlights into the dark corners of the basement. They were polite, professional, and utterly disruptive. Then came the art appraiser. Adeline hired a renowned expert from Sotheby's to begin the process of updating the insurance valuation on her personal art collection. A prim, severe-looking woman arrived with an assistant and spent 6 hours documenting, photographing, and measuring every painting on the walls, many of which Preston had probably bragged about as his own. The appraiser, instructed by Adeline, made a point of referring to each piece as part of the Rousseau family collection. The effect was exactly as they'd planned. The mansion no longer felt like Preston's conquest. It felt contested. The walls were closing in. He was living in a home that was actively rejecting him, a home that still answered to its true mistress. Meanwhile, Frank Morrison was digging deeper into Sabrina Vale. He discovered she wasn't just a financial parasite. She was an active participant. She had a network of contacts, shady art dealers who could quickly sell off assets for cash offshore bankers who could hide the money. She was likely the one advising Preston on how to liquidate everything before the company went under. She wasn't just along for the ride. She was in the driver's seat. Frank also uncovered something more damning. He got a tip from a disgruntled junior accountant at Davenport Tech who was about to be laid off. The accountant had seen drafts of a loan application, a massive last-ditch loan from a high-risk lender based in the Cayman Islands, and the collateral for this loan, a forged deed of sale for Blackwood Manor, transferring the property from Adeline to a shell corporation controlled by Preston. He's not just trying to use it as collateral. Frank explained, his voice grim. He's trying to steal it, to sell it to himself on paper so he can borrow against it. This isn't just a civil matter anymore. This is felony fraud. Forgery wire fraud. A prosecutor would have a field day with this. Mr. Davies's eyes lit up. This was the weapon they needed. This elevated the situation from a bitter divorce dispute to a serious criminal conspiracy. Preston, feeling the pressure from all sides, finally cracked. He called Adeline, and this time she answered, putting the phone on speaker for Genevieve and Mr. Davies to hear. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he roared without a preamble. Adeline took a steadying breath, channeling the calm, collected woman she was becoming. "I'm not sure what you mean, Preston." The accounts, the gardeners, the bug people, the goddamn art lady who looked at Sabrina like she was something she'd scraped off her shoe. "What is this, Adeline?" Some petty revenge fantasy. "I'm simply taking care of my assets, Preston," she replied, her voice cool and level. "As you know, the market is volatile. It's important to be prudent. And the house is old. It requires upkeep." There was a sputtering sound on the other end of the line. He was completely thrown by her tone. He was expecting tears, hysteria. He was getting a CEO. "Your assets." "Your house," he scoffed, but the bravado was thin, brittle. "We are married, Adeline. What's yours is mine." "That's how this works." "Is that how it works?" Adeline asked, a dangerous silkiness in her voice. "Is that why you changed the locks on our home and moved your business partner in?" "She is not my—" "Don't you dare talk down to me," he yelled, his composure shattering completely. "You have no idea what's going on, the pressure I'm under. You're being a child." "Then perhaps your lawyer can speak to my lawyer," Adeline said calmly. "I've retained Arthur Davies. I'm sure you're familiar with his work. He'll be in touch." She hung up the phone before he could respond. The silence in the room was electric. Genevieve let out a whoop of victory. "Checkmate is coming, Addie. The king is cornered, and he doesn't even see the board anymore." They now had Preston panicked his girlfriend on edge and evidence of a serious crime in progress. His arrogance had made him sloppy. He assumed Adeline was weak, that she would crumble. He never imagined she would regroup, rearm, and build a legal war machine with his own hubris as its fuel. The final piece of the plan was set into motion. Mr. Davies drafted the official eviction notice, citing not only Preston's trespassing, but also referencing their knowledge of his fraudulent activities, hinting at criminal charges to come. They also prepared a temporary restraining order, naming both Preston and Sabrina Vale to be served at the same time. But Adeline decided on one last personal touch, one final act to assert her ownership before the law stepped in. She called the security company that serviced Blackwood Manor, the same company Preston had used to change the locks. "Hello," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "This is Adeline Davenport. I'm the owner of record for Blackwood Manor. I have my deed and identification right here. There's been a security issue at my property, and I need to schedule a complete system reset and lock replacement for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. And please," she added a hint of ice in her tone, "send your most discreet team." She was not just taking back her house. She was going to be the one to change the locks. The morning air on the day of the reclamation was crisp and cool, a perfect late autumn day. Adeline stood at the foot of the long driveway, the same spot where she had been forced to park her car just weeks before. But this time she was not alone. To her left stood Genevieve, a pillar of strength in a sharply tailored suit. To her right, Mr. Davies, his presence radiating a quiet, unshakable authority. Behind them were 2 police cars, their presence requested to prevent a breach of the peace, and a large, unmarked van from the security company. Further down the road, a moving truck was on standby, ready for what was to come. Adeline placed a hand on her stomach. The baby was quiet, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. She felt a tremor of fear, a last gasp echo of the woman who had wept in her car. But then she looked at the gates of Blackwood Manor, the symbol of her first rejection, and a cold, clear purpose washed over her. This was not just about a house. This was about drawing a line in the sand of her life. It was the moment she stopped being a victim and became the victor. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Mr. Davies nodded. "It's time." The police cars rolled forward, their lights off, and parked directly in front of the gates. An officer used the intercom. "Preston Davenport, This is the Greenwich Police Department. We are here to accompany a civil servant. Please open the gates." There was a long pause. Then, with a reluctant electronic groan, the iron gates swung inward. The small convoy proceeded up the driveway, the crunch of gravel the only sound. They stopped in a semicircle in front of the grand oak door. Adeline, Genevieve, and Mr. Davies walked to the porch. Adeline felt a strange sense of déjà vu, but this time the power dynamic had been inverted. She was no longer the one begging to be let in. One of the officers, a stout, serious-faced sergeant, knocked firmly on the door. After a moment, it opened. Preston stood there, looking haggard. He was wearing rumpled clothes, and his eyes were bloodshot. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. His gaze fell on Adeline, and a flicker of disbelief, then pure, unadulterated rage crossed his face. "What is this?" he hissed, his voice low and threatening. "You bring the police to my home." "That's the first point of contention, Mr. Davenport," Mr. Davies said, stepping forward smoothly. He held out a thick envelope. "This is not your home. You are being served." Preston stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. Behind him, Sabrina appeared, wrapped in her silk robe, her face a mask of confusion and alarm. "This is an official notice to vacate the premises, which are the sole and exclusive property of my client, Adeline Rousseau Davenport, Mr. Mir." Davies continued, his tone formal and cutting. "You have 1 hour to gather your personal effects and leave. This restraining order, effective immediately, requires you and Ms. Vale to remain at least 500 yards away from this property and from Mrs. Davenport." Sabrina's jaw dropped. "Restraining order? That's insane." Preston finally snatched the documents, his hands trembling with fury as he tore open the envelope. His eyes scanned the legal text, widening in horror as he read the clauses. His gaze shot to Adeline. "You can't do this. We're married. A marriage you chose to dissolve when you locked me out," Adeline said, her voice strong and clear, resonating with a power she hadn't known she possessed. "This house was never part of our marriage. It was and is mine." Furthermore, Mr. Davies added, "Delivering the killing blow, we have been made aware of your attempts to secure a loan using a fraudulent deed of transfer for this property. We have evidence, Mr. Davenport. Forgery is a serious felony. I would advise you to comply with the civil order, lest we be forced to turn that evidence over to the district attorney's office this afternoon." The color drained from Preston's face. The rage was replaced by a dawning, sickening terror. He was trapped, utterly and completely trapped. He looked from Mr. Davies's implacable face to Genevieve's triumphant smirk, and finally to Adeline. In her calm, steady gaze, he saw not the weeping, broken woman he had cast aside, but a formidable queen who had retaken her throne. This was the moment Sabrina's survival instincts kicked into high gear. Her allegiance was not to Preston, but to power and money. She saw in an instant that Preston had none left. His ship wasn't just sinking, it had already hit the ocean floor. "You told me this house was yours," she shrieked, turning on him, her voice a venomous hiss. "You told me she was irrelevant, a nobody you were divorcing, Sabrina." "Calm down," Preston stammered, reaching for her. She slapped his hand away. "Don't you touch me. You used me. You dragged me into your pathetic, bankrupt life." Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed back into the house, a tornado of fury. Preston was left standing in the doorway, a man utterly defeated, watching his last ally abandon him. The police sergeant stepped forward. "Sir, the hour starts now. We will escort you while you pack a bag." What followed was a humiliating spectacle. Adeline waited on the porch, refusing to step inside until it was cleansed of them. She could hear Sabrina frantically throwing things into a suitcase upstairs, her curses echoing through the house. 10 minutes later, Sabrina stormed out, dragging 2 Louis Vuitton suitcases behind her. She didn't even look at Adeline. She shot a look of pure hatred at Preston. "I'll have my lawyer contact whoever is representing you." She spat at him before marching to a sleek Porsche in the garage and peeling out down the driveway without a backward glance. The carrion bird had flown the coop. Preston moved as if in a trance. Escorted by an officer, he reappeared a short while later with a single briefcase and a garment bag. His empire reduced to what he could carry in 2 hands. As he walked past Adeline, he finally stopped and looked at her, his eyes filled with a toxic mixture of hatred and baffled disbelief. "I loved you," he whispered the words, sounding hollow and false. "You were my wife, and I was carrying your son." Adeline replied, her voice unwavering. "You should have remembered that before you gave my key to another woman." He had no answer. With his shoulders slumped, he walked down the driveway, a king dethroned, leaving his stolen kingdom behind. The police escorted him off the property, ensuring he understood the terms of the restraining order. Silence descended. The police cars departed. The only vehicles left were theirs. Genevieve put an arm around Adeline. "You did it." Adeline took a deep breath. She looked at the oak door still standing open. Then she turned to the man from the security company. "You can proceed now," she said. For the next hour, the technician worked replacing every lock, rekeying the gates, installing a new state-of-the-art security system with codes known only to Adeline. As he worked, the moving truck backed up to the house. The crew, supervised by Genevieve, began the methodical process of packing up every trace of Preston and Sabrina. Every suit in the closet, every bottle of cologne in the bathroom, every foreign silk robe. It was all boxed, labeled Davenport Vale, and loaded onto the truck to be sent to Preston's lawyer. When the last box was gone and the last lock was changed, the security expert handed Adeline a new set of keys. They felt cool and solid in her hand. This time, they felt truly hers. She stepped across the threshold. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the hollow silence of betrayal. It was a peaceful silence, a blank canvas. It still smelled faintly of Sabrina's cloying perfume, a ghost of the recent past. Adeline walked from room to room, her home. She saw the small, drilled holes from the termite inspection, the tags on the trees outside the empty spaces on the wall where the appraiser had taken down paintings. They were no longer signs of disruption. They were battle scars, evidence of her silent, victorious campaign. She ended up in the nursery. The little rocking chair her grandmother had used was still in the corner. The tiny clothes were still folded in the dresser. This room was untouched, a sanctuary of the future. She sat in the rocking chair, her hands cradling her belly, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to cry. But these were not tears of pain or humiliation. They were tears of relief, of exhaustion, and of a profound, earth-shattering strength she never knew she had. She had faced the monster, and she had won. The house was hers again. The future was hers to write. In the weeks that followed, Blackwood Manor underwent a transformation. It wasn't a renovation of wood and stone, but of spirit. The first thing Adeline did was hire a professional cleaning crew for what she called a purification. They deep-cleaned every carpet, washed every curtain, and scrubbed every surface until the last lingering scent of Sabrina's perfume and Preston's presence was erased, replaced by the clean, familiar smell of lemon oil and lavender. Genevieve stayed with her for the first week, a boisterous, loving presence that filled the mansion's vast spaces with laughter and bad takeout. Together they rearranged furniture, boxed up wedding photos, and blasted empowering music through the halls. It was a reclaiming not just of property, but of Adeline's life. Preston's downfall was swift and total. News of his company's impending collapse became public, and the stock plummeted to zero. The story of his eviction from Blackwood Manor, while kept out of the mainstream press by Mr. Davies's careful manoeuvring, became the stuff of legend within Greenwich's elite circles. He was a pariah. Mr. Davies used the evidence of the attempted fraud as leverage, forcing Preston to agree to a divorce settlement that was anything but modest. He signed away any and all claims to Adeline's assets, past, present, and future, in exchange for her agreement not to press criminal charges. It was a mercy he didn't deserve, but Adeline had no desire for a protracted criminal case. She just wanted him gone. One rainy afternoon, as she was clearing out the last of Preston's possessions from his home office, she found something tucked away in the back of a desk drawer. It was a small, locked metal box. Her new keys didn't fit, but the security technician had left her a master set for the house's old hardware. She found the right one, and the lock clicked open. Inside there was no damning evidence of other affairs or financial crimes. Instead, there was a bundle of old letters tied with a faded ribbon. They were from Preston's father, a famously ruthless industrialist who had died a decade ago. Adeline began to read. The letters were not paternal. They were cruel, demanding, and dismissive. They chronicled Preston's entire life through a lens of inadequacy. Your grades are merely acceptable, not exceptional. Closing that deal was your job, not an achievement worthy of praise. Don't disappoint me, Preston. Disappointment is for lesser men. The last letter was dated shortly after they were married. This marriage to the Rousseau girl is your one truly clever move, it read. Her family has legacy, something we have never been able to buy. Do not squander it. Her assets are now your responsibility. Leverage them. Grow them. Show me you are finally worthy of the Davenport name. Adeline put the letters down, a chill running through her. It didn't excuse what Preston had done. It didn't absolve him of his cruelty or his choices, but it recontextualized him. He wasn't just a monster born of greed. He was a hollow man, shaped by a lifetime of impossible expectations and a desperate, pathetic need for an approval he could never win. His entire life had been a performance to impress a ghost. His cruelty towards her was the lashing out of a cornered, terrified animal, one that had been trained to believe that value was transactional and love was a form of leverage. For the first time, she felt a sliver of something other than hatred for him, a sad, distant pity. She closed the box and had it sent along with the rest of his things. It was his history, his burden to carry. Her future was waiting. 2 months later, in the sterile white of a hospital room, Adeline gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. She named him Noah. Not Preston Jr., not a name tied to the Davenport legacy of power and pressure, but Noah, a name that meant rest and comfort, a name for a new beginning. Coming home to Blackwood Manor with Noah in her arms was the true reclamation. The house was no longer a tainted space or a battleground. It was a sanctuary. It was home. As she stood in the grand foyer, the afternoon sun slanting through the stained glass windows, she looked down at the tiny, perfect face of her son, sleeping peacefully against her chest. The mansion was silent, but it was a warm, living silence now. It was the silence of peace, filled with the soft sounds of a newborn's breath and the steady, strong beat of his mother's heart. Adeline had faced the ultimate betrayal and had not only survived, but thrived. She had changed the locks, but more importantly, she had changed her life. She had rebuilt her world on a new foundation, not of a man's name or a shared fortune, but of her own resilience, her own strength, and the unconditional love she held for the little boy in her arms. Blackwood Manor was no longer just her inheritance. It was her fortress, and she was its undisputed queen. Adeline's story is a powerful reminder that the greatest strength is often forged in the deepest betrayal. It's a testament to the fact that true ownership isn't just a name on a piece of paper. It's the courage to reclaim your life when someone tries to steal it from you. She was underestimated, discarded, and left to crumble, but she chose to build an empire from the ruins. What do you think was her most powerful move? The financial freeze, the psychological warfare with the inspectors, or the final public eviction? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience and justice resonated with you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of drama survival and ultimate victory. Thank you for listening.